Hello, this is Brooks Whittington with halfwheel.com. Today we're taking a look at the Vertigo Shark, a double guillotine cutter that was introduced by the Lotus Group Integral Logistics during the 2022 TPE trade show. Now, this is a double guillotine cutter with serrated blades, as you can see here, instead of the traditional smooth blades, and thus the name Shark. And this is not the first time that the company has released cutters with serrated blades. The Lotus Jaws cutter was released in 2015, followed by the Lotus Jaws V cutter, which also has serrated blades, as you can see. Now, the Shark is able to cut cigars up to 64 ring gauge, according to the company, although I was easily able to cut caps off of cigars up to 70 ring gauge, just a little bit less of the cap, obviously. It comes in 4 different colors: black, blue, gunmetal, and red, which this is, and all 4 color options cost the same $15. Now, in terms of physical specifications, the exterior of the cutter is made of metal, part of which is covered in a rubberized finish, the colored part, as you see here, the red part in this case. The cutter also includes a back plate, as you see right here behind the blades, which is designed to hold the pieces of tobacco after it's cut, and it also helps that you don't, cut too much off of the cap, so that the cigar unravels. Now, it has a built-in cigar rest as well, that you can put that cigar right there. It holds it right there very, very nicely. And you can see the indentation here that cigar rests on. And an open slot in the shape of a triangle with rounded edges on the back. And what that does is, as you cut that cigar cap, it goes through here, and then it's caught on the back plate. And then you can basically take that out of there. I'll show you that in a minute. You take that out of there and clean it off whenever you want. Clean it out whenever you want. Now, the cutter measures 3.94 inches long when it's closed, and 5 inches when it's fully open, like so. It weighs 1.34 ounces and is 0.4 inches thick, with a total width of 1.66 inches. All right, now that's out of the way, I thought I would show you exactly how to cut a cigar with the Vertigo Shark. Now, similar to a lot of other double guillotine cutters on the market, albeit not ones with serrated blades, the opening and shutting and actually using of the cutter is actually fairly simple. You put your thumb into the larger opening here, and you put your other finger, in this case, either your ring finger, your middle finger, or your index finger. I prefer the middle finger myself, into the other opening. You open it up by pulling the blades apart, and then close it, and cuts through the cap of the cigar. So as you can see here, the cap of the cigar goes into the opening here, and you can either push it against that back plate that's there or not, depending on your preference. You don't get a lot of visibility, so a lot of times you'll want to push that against the back plate at least a little bit. Then you just push through, and the blades cut through the cap. Now, as you push through that cap, you can see that the cap is actually caught right there in that opening, as mentioned before, and then you can basically either fish that out. I don't typically do that because my fingers are fairly fat, and it's not easy for me. Or you can just put it over whatever the, wherever you want to, and open it up, and it pops right out, just like that. And that works fairly well for the vast majority of the cigars that I cut with this cutter. Normally, I had problems with smaller ring gauges, Lanceros, things of that nature. They just kind of fall out before I could get to it. But for the most part, it works fairly well. Now, here is the problem the main problem I had with the cutter. And you can see here that after cutting that cigar, there is a shelf of tobacco right here. And this is fairly normal for what I got with this cutter in terms of the results. Not just the pieces that are left over, but this little piece, this little part here that you can tell, is just not a straight cut. It is definitely, there's a bump, if you will, a shelf, a cliff of tobacco that is left over from that cutter. And it definitely is noticeable when you put it in your mouth. It's definitely noticeable that it's not straight, not even close to straight. I have detailed photographs in the actual review that show this in a much more detailed manner. The video obviously is not quite as good as I'd like it to be, but there's definitely a shelf of tobacco right here that you can see it's not straight, and it's definitely something that I had happened with at least 3/4 of the cigars that I cut with this cutter. So as is the case, I'm normally with these reviews, I'm going to go through a list of good and bad things I found about the cutter after the month or so that I was using it for pretty much every cigar that I smoked. Now, the biggest problem I have with this cutter is fairly simple. The cuts when using this specific cutter are just subpar more often than they should be. They range from, little pieces of tobacco left over after cutting to a shelf of tobacco, a cliff of tobacco that was left after cutting through the cap itself. I did have some issues also with damaged caps and a little bit of the wrapper, but that was a minor compared to the issue that pretty much every time I cut a cigar with this cutter, I was going to get some pieces of tobacco in my mouth, or I was going to have a piece, that was not clean all the way through, or both at the same time. So those were definitely the larger issues when it comes to the actual cutter and the cuts that I got from it. Having said that, I'm also not a big fan of the back plates itself, and the reason is twofold. Number one, you really don't have as much control over where you want to put the cut. You can barely see in there, and visibility is the second part of this, where you just can't see it, you can't control it. It's basically all of that control is taken away from you when you put the cap of that cigar against the back plate. If I wanted to do a torpedo, for example, I smoked a lot of torpedoes, and I had to cut at least twice, and more likely three times, is with a torpedo, in order to get a decent draw off of it. And with a regular traditional cutter, you would just cut it once and be done with it. Now, with that said, there are some good things I like about the cutter too. One of them is the fact that the finger openings, as I mentioned, are different sizes, and they're large enough for me, a fairly large man, to actually not have any issues with them whatsoever. I love the fact that you can fit these things in here, and you can actually cut with no problems whatsoever. It gives you, a lot of control when you're talking about where to put the cigar into the cutter and how much pressure you can push down on that I don't have to pigeonhole my thumb into a specific area like this one. Now, it does work on the left hand or the right hand. I tried both, although my left hand obviously was not quite as good, but it does actually work. You just got to turn it around. Now, another good thing about this cutter is the cigar rest, which I find myself using. And it works very, very well on any number of different sizes and vitolas. It's just a really nice thing to have in terms of the capability to be able to use that if you want to, or if you're sitting in a place where you just don't want to put the cigar down, or you don't have an ashtray necessarily. So that's nice to have. Also, the fact is that the cutter is very light, and it's very easy to carry around in your pocket. Forget about it. It's very nice in that regard. Now, as part of this review, I wanted to give a short explanation on how serrated blades work, especially in the context of a double guillotine cutter like this one. Now, I've reviewed 3 of these cutters now, and all 3 of them have had major problems giving me a clean, consistent cut, especially when compared to a normal double guillotine traditional cutter. So I emailed the company, Lotus, who makes the Vertigo Shark, and I got an email back from Rosemary Sharp, the president of the company, and she said, quote, "We found a serrated blade to consistently result in a clean cut and never dull," end quote. Now, putting aside the fact that a blade never dulls, because I've never known of a blade that never dulls somewhat, the idea that a serrated blade is going to give you a consistently clean cut is not borne out by my reviews or the design of a serrated blade in general. Here's a serrated blade on a knife, as you can see. A serrated blade is meant to be used in a way where you're moving the blade both downwards while sawing. In other words, both vertically and horizontally at the same time. Now, this is very different from a normal slicing motion on a traditional blade, straight blade, which is basically just a vertical up and down motion. Now, in order to demonstrate this, I have both a straight blade and a serrated blade, as well as a loaf of bread, a very hard loaf of bread. When you're talking about a straight blade, it's designed to cut one way, straight down. Easy as pie, right? The problem is with a serrated blade, if you try to do that same thing, it doesn't work quite as well. However, if you actually use the sawing motion while pushing down the way that it's supposed to be used, the way it's designed to use, then it will work very, very well. The main problem this cutter has is that the blades can only move vertically and not both vertically and horizontally the way that a serrated blade is meant to be used. This takes away from the point of having serrated blades in the first place, because it can't be used to the main advantage that it has. And so in the end, after all of that, can I recommend the Vertigo Shark? Unfortunately, the answer is no. I love the overall look. I love the lightweight. I love the finger openings that were apparently designed for larger people like me. And I love the design of the built-in cigar rest. I also like the fact that it can cut cigars up to 70 ring gauge, and the $15 price point's not bad either. Unfortunately, too many of the cuts that I ended up with were below the standard that I've grown accustomed to when using traditional double guillotine blades. The serrated blades, in fact, on this cutter, as with the other two cutters I reviewed as well, they add a very interesting visual touch, but they don't seem to hold up when it comes to actually giving you clean, consistent cuts. I'm Brooks Whittington. For all of your cigar review and news needs, go to halfwheel.com.